This video is sponsored by Paradox Arc. Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at Tlatoani, Aztec Cities, a newly released city builder that just came out into early access today, inspired by the old classics such as Pharaoh and Caesar, with some interesting ideas of its own to explore. If you'd like to pick it up, check out the link in the description and pinned comment below, but if you're curious about how the game works before you make that decision, or if you've picked it up and would like to get familiar with some of its core systems, just keep on watching as I cover some of the essential things to keep in mind as you play. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below and I'll answer all that I can. But otherwise, without further ado and with timestamps down below, let's begin. Housing and population. As is standard in any city builder, everything runs off your available labor force, and to secure a labor force, you'll need to provide them with housing, goods, and services. There are a few ways in which Tlatoani is unlike its inspirations and predecessors that are worth highlighting, so even if you've played these kinds of games before, there's things to make note of here. First of all, keep in mind that your citizens to population ratio is 1 to 10. That is to say that every 1 citizen actually represents 10 people. So if the mission objective is to acquire a population of 5,000, that's actually just 500 citizens. A quick note on that. You should keep in mind that if you're hosting festivals that require human sacrifice, killing non-captives because you don't have enough captives will take away from your population. So if you ever find yourself wondering why you keep losing people and you just can't seem to hit your population targets, this might be why. Turning your attention to the Population and Demographics Advisor gives you a breakdown of the current population, and it also lets you know how much additional room you currently have for new arrivals. While farmers' huts, cottages, and houses will provide a place for commoners to stay, noble compounds and palaces will serve as homes for nobles or elites instead. Farmers' huts are an excellent option for early use in particular, as they provide living space for your initial population while also providing essential goods right off the bat, something we'll touch more on in a following section. It is worth noting though that certain important buildings in Tlatoani can only be placed in areas that have a good ambience, and farmers' huts do not provide a strong positive modifier to the ambience of an area, so you'll likely want to place them a little out of the way of where you intend to have your fancier housing, your temples, your plazas, and your bureaucratic buildings like the tax collector. The other standard housing option is the common house, able to fit a few more people than the farmers' huts at every level, though serving only the singular purpose of providing people with a place to stay. And then there are the noble houses for your elites and the royal palace for your family and additional nobles, providing not just a place for them to live, but also improving the output of a handful of different buildings. These are all mostly the kinds of buildings that show up later in a city, so don't feel rushed to place a royal palace down too early or anything. As with most city builders, the initial buildings you place down are the worst version of said building. With proper time and care, they'll upgrade up the chain. In the case of housing, this means that the same amount of space will be able to fit more and more people, which in turn means it'll generate more taxes in that same amount of space as well. Since the map sizes are always limited, even on larger maps, optimizing land use is of utmost importance. To upgrade, houses need well dippers for water, a local market where they can acquire a variety of essential and luxury goods, and a collection of services at varying levels as well. You should also keep an eye on the information presented here to spot what isn't listed elsewhere. For example, even though it isn't indicated anywhere else on the screen, you absolutely must have a sweeper nearby before a house will upgrade. This isn't true for farmers' huts, though, who need much less to be satisfied in the first place and to start upgrading their huts into cottages. Keep in mind that houses don't upgrade immediately after having their needs met. It can take up to a year at times, so make sure that services don't suddenly become unavailable partway through the process. And if you're wondering why a building with all its needs met hasn't upgraded yet, this long timer is probably why. Either way, when placing buildings that fulfill these various needs, keep an eye on the coverage areas they provide before placing them. Ignore the color overlay on the roads and instead look out for these dots. They represent if a building is actually reachable or not, and it's a much more reliable tool for decision making. A well dipper, sweeper, sentry post, small market, alcove, telpokali, and any of the numerous shrines are all the bare minimum buildings you'll need to place down within walking distance to upgrade houses, so make sure you're leaving room for all of these structures. Their reach is outward in a radius around them, so it makes sense to place them centrally with all the housing around them, and you can always click the question mark button in the build menu to see just how big their reach is. You'll eventually need more advanced buildings to provide a higher level of service for each of these ones, of course, but the handful I mentioned are the ones to plan around as a beginner for sure. With that said, you should keep in mind that symmetry plays a big role in Tlatoani, making some of these more advanced buildings more powerful, and in some cases, lacking symmetry, like lacking ambience, might even prevent you from placing certain buildings down. But houses don't just need services to upgrade, they need goods too. Maize and pottery, for example, are necessary for common homes to upgrade to the second level. That's why you need a market. But let's talk a little bit about actually getting goods to the market for distribution. Let's discuss goods, resources, and trade. There's a ton of goods that need to be managed in Tlatoani, from a variety of food to construction material to luxury goods and even weapons. Some of these are raw resources needing to be processed into finished products. Others are needed for more and more advanced types of construction. Some are essential if you want to see your buildings upgrade, and others will be a crucial source of wealth for your city. The Commerce Advisor outlines all of the goods and resources you need to keep an eye on, giving you a quick rundown of the producers and consumers of any given type of resource, and this is where you can actually set if something is available for local consumption or not. Unchecking market access means that any markets, homes, or amenities that would otherwise use this resource will now be banned from doing so, while unchecking industry access means the same for any buildings that would process the currently selected resource into something else, like clay into pottery or stone into artwork. You can go to individual buildings and tell them to halt production, and you can go to individual markets and tell them not to stock and sell specific goods, but this window is a faster way to set citywide preferences, and will be essential at times to ensure you're able to pay your tributes or export resources rather than see them consumed by your local populace. Whether you want goods to be used locally or for export, though, there are a few key buildings you'll need to place in order to manage the movement of goods. We already discussed the market, available in a couple of sizes, able to store and distribute a variety of consumer goods to homes within its radius as long as they're connected by road. It's a little unique in how it handles goods, as it simply accepts them from nearby storage buildings and distributes them locally. All other buildings that handle the movement or storage of goods work a little differently, with extremely limited space across a larger variety of goods, and with the option to set the building's behavior to simply stockpile it, to store it and distribute it using a few different approaches, to import it, export it, or set it aside as tribute. Import and export can only be set at the trading post, and you can only set this option based on the trade partner assigned to said trading post. The Empire map will show you all potential trade partners and what they're looking to buy or sell. In some cases, you'll first need to pay to establish a trade route. Either way, once a trade route has been established, that city can be set as the trade partner for a specific trading post, and then the import, export, and tribute settings can be used accordingly, with the tribute option only available when trading with the capital, based on what your annual tribute is actually set to, something that'll change and grow as the years go by. Keep in mind that for some of the campaign missions, you will rely on an import of essential resources, including construction resources, because they won't be locally available. This holds true for some of the scenario maps and custom maps too, but I wanted to make note of it here for the actual campaign because it might catch you off guard when playing through the early missions. Trade aside, quarter stops, quarter yards, and granaries are similarly used to stockpile and distribute goods, but they can never be set to export or import goods. They're for local distribution and redistribution only. You can daisy chain these buildings to get something from the outskirts of your city to more central locations, or vice versa, but keep an eye on the same dots as you would when checking if, say, markets and well dippers can reach homes. There is a limited reach for these storage buildings, hence the need to daisy chain them sometimes, and you want to make sure that your marketplaces and trade posts are able to acquire what they need. With extremely limited storage space in these buildings too, you want to make sure you properly consider what you need and where as you place and assign tasks for these buildings. One final note on this topic, you'll notice that production buildings and construction will list significantly larger numbers when talking about these resources, while storage buildings, marketplaces, tribute, and the like will use significantly smaller numbers. This is intentional, and you can think of it as packaging, I guess. The production buildings will, for example, stockpile 100 units of a thing before packaging it up to ship out. And while it doesn't really interfere with gameplay in any way, it might catch you off guard when you first see it, so I figured I'd mention it here before moving on. Farming. Apart from acting as a source of food, farming in Tlatoani also provides the resources you need to perform rituals and produce more advanced goods. All three are often needed to complete missions. Farming is fairly simple in Tlatoani, but there are a few key considerations I wanted to go over, particularly because though it is fairly straightforward in many ways, it takes a unique approach to some aspects that are well worth noting. Using the fertility overlays, or by clicking on individual tiles and learning to identify them visually, you can tell where you'll likely be able to see the best yields and for which crops. Not all crops have the same needs, and on some maps, you might only be able to farm certain items, relying on trade for others. First things first, as mentioned before, you'll need to put down farmers' huts and ensure there are people living in them to actually do the farming. Then, when it comes time to place the fields, you'll want to keep an eye on which farmer's hut is being assigned to the field you're putting down. Unlike other games where you can choose the farm building and then place the fields afterwards, in Tlatoani, the fields will automatically be assigned to the closest hut, even if they aren't touching. Any one hut can only tend to 32 tiles, regardless of how upgraded it is, and so you'll want to find a nice layout that works to maximize the number of tiles while also avoiding unseemly shapes. Irrigation helps each tile produce more of a resource, and canals can provide this boost 3 tiles in either direction as long as they're connected to a source of water. That means that you want to limit your fields to be 6 wide, with canals on either side in cases where you want irrigation to reach all tiles. Some types of fields don't need irrigation, so don't waste space or resources unnecessarily. The ideal layout will typically be a 6x6 grid, with 4 tiles taken up by the farmer's hut itself, and the remaining 32 for the fields. Keep in mind also that one farmer's hut doesn't need to strictly farm one kind of resource. Any 32 tiles can be assigned to any hut, and this can be a combination of maize, chili, or anything else you see here, including fruit trees that you can use to source fruits while also improving the ambience of neighborhoods as well. Having a variety of food available for your people is actually an important consideration, as the game does take into account the availability of a balanced diet, so don't think you can just get away with endless fields of maize to run massive metropolises. Make sure a nearby granary or porter stop is accepting the farmed resources, as they won't otherwise get to where they need to go, but keep in mind that industrial buildings will pick raw materials up directly from the farmers' huts as needed. So, a brewer will grab what he needs right from the hut, for example, and then deposit the output at a nearby porter stop or yard for further distribution. Here again, it's worth remembering that these resources can be toggled for market and industrial use. In some cases, you'll want to stockpile goods for rituals and tributes, for example, but if you allow market access, your populace will happily use it all up for other purposes. But there you have it, folks, a few quick essential tips that should help you get a head start in Tlatoani. If you haven't already picked the game up, don't hesitate to check it out at the link in the description and pinned comment below, and if you have any additional questions about how it plays, feel free to drop them in the comments, and I'll answer what I can. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. They'll keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.